God eftermiddag. Här ska vi direkt till presskonferensen om toppmötet mellan EU och USA i Göteborg.
We have been discussing, as you realize, matters that is on our common agenda. First of all, world trade. The necessity to go ahead with a new round, to liberalize trade, to give a clear signal about the need to create growth in the world economy. We realize the clear linkage between the last Uruguay round and the consecutive years of good economic growth in the world economy. Now we are in a little bit more if not stagnant phase, so at least a phase with lower growth. We need a new impetus. We need a new stimulus to the economy. And the best thing to do is to go for a new round about how to liberalize trade. We have discussed that, also some disputes and mechanism to solve disputes. But this is the main message. Go along with the liberalization of the trade to support and stimulate growth, a common responsibility for the European Union and United States. The second thing we have discussed was about how to find a way to cooperate to combat climate change. Because you know, and that's not a secret, we don't agree upon how we regard the Kyoto Protocol. So to say, we agree to disagree about substance according to the Kyoto Protocol. The European Union will stick to the Kyoto Protocol and go for a ratification process. US has chosen another policy. But we have the same targets, and we have to meet the same problems. The climate change is not isolated to Europe or to America. It's a global threat. So nevertheless, if you are in favor or against the Kyoto Protocol, you have to take action. So we agreed to disagree about substance, but agreed to go on with some type of procedure that can lead us back to a position that we can cooperate and try to support each other. We will call for personal representatives to follow up our discussion, and that will mean that we send a signal that we go on ahead with the Kyoto Protocol, the American government go on ahead with their policy, but we try to cooperate as much as possible and try to find a process for that. That was the second thing we discussed. The third thing was about HIV/AIDS. There is a terrible threat for many millions, not least in Africa. A generation can be swept away, children without parents, and children born with HIV. It's a tremendous threat, and something we just can't neglect. We have to take our part of the responsibility. The American president have proposed a fund together with the UN, and we discussed also how the European Union could support in that work. That was the third thing we discussed. Then we also discussed, of course, the situation on Balkans. We are close allies, we cooperate, and we said that we came in together, and then the day come We don't know when we will go out together. That is important to say. And then we will do everything we can to support the governments around in the region and to stay as constructive, liable partners for a good progress according democracy and economy. It's not easy, but our presence is necessary. We discussed also the situation in the Middle East, and we have a joint statement. First time, the European Union and US, how to support the road back for peace and reconciliation. And that is to say that we urge the partners to live up to the ceasefire, because without an ending of violence, there will be no possibilities to go on with the so-called Mitchell report, that after the end of violence, we'll call for confidence-building measures and then negotiations about peace and reconciliation. We stand together, we urge both partners to go for the ceasefire and stick to it. As you can hear, this is an agenda covering different subjects, but it is also, of course, a way to express our common values, how to cooperate about the economy, how to take responsibility for the conditions, living conditions for the next generation, how to cooperate for peace and reconciliation around the world, based on values and based on the idea that Europe and the United States have to take a global responsibility in a global partnership. That is the main content during our US-EU summit today. I give the floor to the President of the United States. Please.
Mr. Prime Minister, thank you very much, Mr. President. I first want to start by thanking our Swedish hosts, particularly the King and the Prime Minister, for the generous hospitality shown to me and my wife and our delegation. Millions of Americans trace their heritage to Sweden, and so it's a huge honor for me to be the first sitting President of the United States to come to this country, to be with our friends. We had great discussions over lunch and before lunch. I guess my summary is that friends are able to speak candidly and constructively. In our relationship between the United States and Sweden, and the United States and the European Union is strong and it is healthy. The values and the goals we share are durable, and they're great goals. We've resolved to work closely together on issues that confront our nations. We share a strong interest in maintaining our economic ties. The EU and the United States have got the largest economic relationship in the world. Investment and annual trade come to approximately $1.5 trillion. And that's a relationship that is important to the working people of our respective countries. Our trade relationship is strong. The recent resolution over the dispute on bananas proves that we can work to solve problems. And we'll continue to work closely with the EU in supporting a new round on global trade negotiations. We share a commitment to building a Europe that is whole and free and at peace. We believe that we must continue to cooperate in Southeast Europe. As I told the Prime Minister, same thing I said yesterday at NATO. We went into Southeast Europe together, and we will leave together. That's a commitment of our government. We must also work to build institutions necessary so that at some point in time we can take our troops out of Southeast Europe. But until that happens, our government is committed to working with NATO and the EU to bring peace and democracy and stability to that part of the world. The EU and the United States also understand we must be partners in confronting environmental challenges. The United States is committed to addressing climate change. We had a constructive discussion on this topic over lunch, and we agreed to create new channels of cooperation on this important topic. As the Prime Minister said, we don't agree on the Kyoto Treaty, but we do agree that climate change is a serious issue and we must work together. We agreed climate change requires a global response and agreed to intensify cooperation on science and on technology. And finally, we share important challenges, as the Prime Minister mentioned. Fighting HIV/AIDS, malaria, and tuberculosis in Africa. Helping Africa lift itself out of poverty with trade and open markets. Continuing efforts to ease tension and foster peace on the Korean Peninsula. We agree on the need for all parties to halt the violence in the Middle East. These are great goals, and we share common purposes. And it has been my honor to represent our great nation with the great nations of Europe in this fruitful and constructive dialogue. Thank you, Mr. Prime Minister.
Thank you. President Prodi.
Yeah, this first summit has shown how solid is our partnership, more than solid, I say indispensable for US, for Europe, and for world peace. When we act together, we do enormous progress for peace. And we have taken a few issues this morning in which our cooperation has done very concrete results. Trade, we can launch a new global trade round in Qatar if we work together. We have today committed ourselves to this goal. We agreed on a common approach for a inclusive WTO round, and we shall also address the specific interest of developing countries and the legitimate concern expressed by civil society. Somebody think that we lose too much time on working on trade disputes, but it's not true. Now the real disputes are a very, very small amount, and this morning we worked to make this even smaller. We have really stated today that we want to talk rather than to litigate, and we shall do. This will be our road. We have had the recent agreement on bananas and the gluten, and we are going on in trying agreements, even in the hottest spots of problems of trade. Of course, for the climate change, I don't repeat the difference we have, but we have decided to work together on research. And I think that this is a real goal, because for the future we can approach our position. Our objective and our duty remain the successful conclusion of the July conference in Bonn, and I was pleased to hear that the US will participate to this conference. So the dialogue goes on, even if there are big differences in this. So we agreed also on to stop the spread of disease, notably in Africa, and we Europeans are still trying to convince to have an agreement in the pricing system to make good medicine affordable for the poorest people in the world. But even in this subject, we had a very interesting exchange of view and very interesting approach. I don't repeat the work we have done together in the Balkans. The problem remains, but the European Union has assumed the leading role in this common challenge in the Balkans. And the cooperation in the Middle East has had results, and we have also started the idea of building up some foundation for economic cooperation in the Middle East, because if we don't work also in the economic fields, we shall never have a stable peace.
Thank you, Romano. And you are George.
Alan Nachman from AFP. President Bush, about a decade ago, your father came to Europe around the time that the Soviet Union was breaking up, and he said he had a broad vision for Europe and its future and its expansion. In your 5 months in office, have you formed your own vision for Europe? Would you like to share that with us?
Tomorrow in Warsaw, I'll be glad to give you a little preview. I believe that we have an opportunity to form an alliance of peace, that Europe ought to include nations beyond the current scope of the EU and NATO. I strongly believe in NATO expansion, and I believe that the EU ought to expand as well. I believe a Europe whole and free is going to be a Europe that trades actively with the United States and with the rest of the world. Saturday, I'm going to be visiting with Mr. Putin. It's a very important time for me to visit with Mr. Putin to assure him a couple of things. One, Russia is not the enemy of the United States. Two, the Cold War is over. And the mentality that used to grip our two nations during the Cold War must end. Three, we look forward to working with Europe. Russia ought not to fear a Europe. Russia ought to welcome an expanded Europe on her border. And so my vision of Europe is a larger vision, more countries, more free trade, and one in which welcomes Russia and the Ukraine, welcomes Russia and encourages Russia to make the right choices when it comes to the institutions necessary to be able to become a partner with Europe and the United States.
My name is Jonas Lindgren. I work for the Swedish news agency TT. A question for Mr. Bush, if I may. After the contacts you had and the talks you had today, are there areas where you would feel like deepening the cooperation with Europe? And at the same time, are there also areas where you feel that you think so differently that this is no longer possible? And the second question, if I may, on Kyoto. If research that you carry on together should show that there is a possibility of adding something to the protocol, would you be interested in that, or is that a finished question? Thank you.
Well, I think a lot of people are surprised to hear that there is a spirit of cooperation on global warming and on climate change. I say loud and clear that our nation is willing to lead on this issue. And I laid out the principles necessary for leadership. One, we must stabilize emissions. Two, results must be measured. And we've got to spend money and time on additional science, which we're willing to do and willing to cooperate with the EU on. That we must be flexible in our solution. I think it's important to understand that things and information changes, and therefore any solution that we agree to will be flexible. Four, that we believe that our economies can grow and at the same time come up with climate change solutions. Five, that we're willing to look at market-based solutions. And six, that the solution ought to be global. And so, to answer your question, there's a lot of ways for us to deepen discussions on this important issue. I understand the concerns of people in Europe. The Prime Minister was most eloquent in his assessment and summary of the attitudes of people, not only in Sweden, but in Europe. People in our nation care about global warming and greenhouse emissions as well. We didn't feel like the Kyoto Treaty was well balanced. It didn't include developing nations. The goals were not realistic. However, that doesn't mean we cannot continue to work together, and will work together on reducing greenhouse gases. I've laid out an energy plan that I shared with the Prime Minister and the President that not only addresses our nation's energy needs, but because I've got an emphasis on conservation, as well as renewables and natural gas and nuclear power. The energy plan, if implemented, will help with the global climate. Our nation is making progress. There's more to do, and we can work more with Europe. So there's an area right there that some would have said, well, they don't have much to talk about. We got a lot to talk about, and I look forward to the discussions. Ron?
Thank you, sir. On the same topic,
There's other people up here, you know.
I actually have a question for two presidents.
Oh, that's good.
First to you, not a single European Union nation has ratified the Kyoto Treaty, which was signed when many of your counterparts were in office, yet you've been criticized by these same leaders for rejecting it. Why do you suppose their actions have not been as forceful as their rhetoric? And President Prodi, why haven't any EU nations ratified the treaty?
Well, I don't have much more to add to the subject. I think that's a good question for President Prodi. I believe people are genuine about the issue. I don't believe there's any politics necessarily. I think people are genuinely concerned and are trying to address the issue as best as they possibly can. And but I'd be interested in your answer.
Oh, well, the answer, there is no one single country who has declared not to ratify it. The ratification process will start soon it started already in some countries, it's going on, and there is no one message till now of refusal or delay of ratification.
Anders Palmgren, TV4 Sweden. Mr. President Bush, how do you really look upon a stronger, more united European Union with the ambition of being the #1 economy in the world? Do you see this as a threat to the U.S.? And will this lead to that U.S. will decrease its engagement in Europe in the future?
I appreciate good competition. I believe competition brings out the best in nations and people and entities, and our nation welcomes good, healthy competition. Secondly, I don't view European Union and its consolidation as a zero-sum game for the United States. I believe the stronger Europe is, the better it is off for America. The more peaceful Europe is, the better it is for America. I am concerned about isolationism and protectionism, not only amongst some voices in Europe, but also in my own country. And I think that we got to do everything we can to unite, to promote free trade. Not only free trade for the benefit of our own people, but free trade for the benefit of developing nations as well. We spend a lot of time talking about Africa, as we should. Africa is a nation that suffers from incredible disease, and it suffers from poverty as well. And my way of thinking is the only way for Africa to grow and to develop and to provide hope and opportunity for its citizens is for there to be trade between the United States and Africa, between the EU and Africa. So I view a strong EU as good for the world, and I welcome a strong EU. My trip here was to send that signal as loud as I can, that we will remain engaged with the EU and with NATO, that we respect the EU and NATO, and we understand its importance to the future of our country. Steve.
Steve Holland with Reuters, sir. Mr. President, why did you decide to stop bombing exercises at Vieques Island? Were you swayed by the protests of the Puerto Rican people, or were there political factors involved, such as the concerns of Hispanic Americans?
He's referring to the fact that upon assuming office, I had was presented, like I have been on other issues, with an agreement between Puerto Rico and the United States government that we would conduct exercises off of the island of Vieques for the United States Navy. My attitude is that the Navy ought to find somewhere else to conduct its exercises for a lot of reasons. One, there's been some harm done to people in the past. Secondly, these are our friends and neighbors, and they don't want us there. And so I appreciate the fact that the Defense Department and the Navy responded and have made the statement loud and clear that within a reasonable period of time that the Navy will find another place to practice and to be prepared to keep the peace. It's the right agreement. I applaud the Defense Department and the Navy for reaching that agreement.
Roland Siegloff, Deutsche Presseagentur, German press agency DPA. Mr. President, my question is on the Middle East. Mr. Bush, do you see Europe and the United States as equal and fully equal partners and mediators in the Middle East conflict?
I see that Europe and the United States with the need to speak with one voice and one voice only, and that is implement Mitchell, starting with breaking the cycle of violence. The EU has had some constructive meetings in the Middle East, and we appreciate their efforts. The Prime Minister went to the Middle East, shared with us his concerns and what he saw. But what we must do as friends and allies is say only one thing and work to only one goal right now. And that is to stop the cycle of violence. There should be no understanding. There should be no political dialogue isn't going to happen until the violence stops. And all parties have got to understand that if there's a genuine desire for a more peaceful situation, the ability to discuss a wide range of issues, that they've got to break the cycle of violence. And we're committed to working together to do just that. We're committed to spending our capital and energies. The Middle East is consuming a lot of time in my administration, as it should. It's a very important part of the world. I'm pleased to report yesterday in Brussels that the Tenet initiative was able to at least get signatures on a piece of paper. But signatures are just that until there's action. And there must be action. And well, that's the message that the EU leaders and my country is going to send to the parties involved. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Och med det så avslutades alltså presskonferensen från Göteborg om toppmötet mellan EU och USA. Här ska vi fortsätta prata om vad som har kommit ut av det här mötet mellan supermakten USA och EU-länderna. EUs ordförande statsminister Göran Persson inledde den här presskonferensen med att redogöra för 5 olika punkter som man diskuterat. Ekonomin, klimatförändringarna, AIDS, situationen på Balkan och Mellanöstern. Persson betonade att man är oeniga i flera frågor men att man också hittat samarbetsvägar och ska fortsätta att arbeta för ett samarbete mellan Europa och USA. Med oss här i studion nu Erik Åsard från Nordamerikanska institutet vid Uppsala universitet. Erik, om vi tittar först nu på i en första kommentar, vad säger du om vad som framkommit av den här presskonferensen?
Ja, en allmän kommentar är väl att det inte är särskilt mycket nytt eller oväntat som kommer ut från det här mötet idag. Och de punkter man har diskuterat är väl också de man kunde förvänta sig. Dock noterar jag att en punkt som har diskuterats innan och som diskuterades av president Bush när han var i Bryssel i NATO-mötet där inte kom upp, alltså frågan om USAs satsning på ett missilförsvar som inte tydligen diskuteras idag. Man kan ju notera det i alla fall.
Eller också diskuterar man den men tog inte upp det så att säga på presskonferensen?
Möjligtvis också det, ja.
Men där ligger man lågt alltså i det här?
Ja, tydligt gör man det. I övrigt så betonade ju båda parterna väldigt starkt samarbete. Att man vill fortsätta samarbeta och snarast fördjupa det. Och också att man har väldigt gemensamma värden. Och jag tycker att båda parter här, alla tre talare, även EU-presidenten, betonade väldigt mycket samarbetsaspekten.
Bo Inge Andersson, vår utrikespolitiska kommentator, finns med oss i Göteborg. Vad säger du, Bo Inge? Kan man säga att man har nått framgång i någon av de här frågorna som man har presenterat idag?
Ja, alltså det var inte mycket som kom ut, det kan man inte säga. Visserligen när det gäller Mellanöstern så är det väl lite anmärkningsvärt i positiv bemärkelse att man kommer ha enat sig om ett slags plattform. Men det har ju inte blivit någon större fredsinitiativ eller liknande. Men att man enar sig om Mitchell-rapporten som alltså bland annat både kräver stopp för våldet och som är väldigt kritisk mot Israels bosättningspolitik. Det är naturligtvis en intressant punkt. Men sen har det ju varit så, om man jämför med den press och det som har varit tidigare och även de uttalanden som en del EU-politiker har gjort före Bushs ankomst, så har man ju nu då på bästa EU-sätt och igår på bästa NATO-sätt försökt att släta över det mesta, och det märker man ju även i Bushs retorik att han talar väldigt väl om Europa.
Och Inge, vad ska vi säga om den här deklarationen om Mellanöstern? Det är alltså en historisk deklaration i så mått att det är första gången som USA och EU tillsammans uttalar sig i den här frågan. Men vad kan det få för betydelse för fredsprocessen?
Ja, alltså historiskt, det är ett ord, det har gått inflation i det nu för tiden i journalistiken, men det är i alla fall första gången som man har en gemensam plattform där båda parter ändå vill agera ut efter en viss fastställd tidsplan. Man har, och även FN och även Ryssland är med i detta. Och det betyder ju ändå på något sätt att de som försöker medla är överens om en linje.
Erik Åsard, klimatfrågan, vad kan vi säga om den? Man betonar här att man är oeniga om hur man ska komma till rätta med de här växthusgaserna. Men man ska ändå samarbeta. Hur ska man kunna samarbeta om man i grunden är oeniga?
Ja, det kan man undra. Alltså, här betonade man ju att man var hade en gemensam syn på vissa frågor när det gäller till exempel att det är en viktig fråga. Det kan man ju se som ett visst framsteg eftersom Bush-administrationen tidigare när man sa nej till Kyoto-avtalet faktiskt förnekade han förnekade att det fanns någonting i stort sett som hette växthuseffekten. Så där kan man säga att USA rör sig lite grann i riktning mot EUs linje. Men man kan ju undra vad det innebär när man säger att man vill ta ett globalt ansvar för den här frågan. Och Bush använde ordet global response, alltså globalt svar på ett problem som man ser här. Det finns ju inte, det specificeras i alla fall inte i presskonferensen vad egentligen det innebär. Innebär det att man gemensamt ska göra någonting? Gemensam forskning, gemensamma initiativ för att försöka lösa de här problemen. Jag tror att det här tyder på vad man sa här, att USA och Europa tills vidare kommer att gå skilda vägar när det gäller den här processen. Alltså Europa kommer att gå vidare på förhandlingsvägen när det gäller att försöka ratificera Kyoto-protokollet. USA kommer att gå en annan väg. Man kommer att satsa på att, som man säger nu, fördjupa forskningen. Ytterligare forskning behövs, alltså säger amerikanerna, medan Europa tycker att vi har tillräckligt med forskning för att gå in för ett specifikt mål att ta ner koldioxidutsläppen.
Mm. Och Inge, helt kort om klimatfrågorna. Vad tycker du att man kom fram till här?
Som Erik sa, man kom inte fram till särskilt mycket, möjligen att det finns en växthuseffekt. Intressant i sammanhanget är kanske också att Bush nu säger vad hans utrikesminister tidigare sa om Balkan, att vi gick in tillsammans, vi gick ut tillsammans. Där har alltså Bush sagt någonting som i och för sig har sagts tidigare, men nu är det Bush som har sagt det för att rätta till en del underligheter som har sagts tidigare.
Tack så länge Bo Inge Andersson med oss från toppmötet i Göteborg. Alltså vi ska också säga tack tillfälligt till Erik Åsard som är med oss från Nordamerikanska institutet vid Uppsala universitet. Vi ska fortsätta prata om de här frågorna direkt efter nyheterna. Vi fortsätter alltså att sända digitalt. Så stanna gärna med oss, titta vidare. Det kommer fler intressanta synpunkter på vad som har kommit fram av den här presskonferensen. Men nu alldeles strax blir det nyheter.